Welcome back, everyone. Up to this point, we have learned how to control colors, backgrounds, and layouts. But text is the heart of any web page. It's what people read, and styling it properly makes a huge difference in readability and design. In this section, we will explore how CSS lets us control things like defining the font family, the size of the text, width. We will also see how to adjust spacing, alignment, and decoration, or even transform text into upper or lowercase automatically. So, this chapter is really about making your text not just readable, but also visually appealing and consistent across your website. So let's dive into it and see how fonts and text styling work in CSS. Let's look at the font properties. These are the properties that let us control how our text looks and feels on the page. So the most common one is font family, which tells the browser which font to use. For example, we could use Times New Roman or a generic family like Serif or Sans Serif. Next, we have font size, which changes the size of the text. You can set it in pixels, percentage, or keywords like small or large. And then there's font weight, which controls how thick or bold the text appears with values like normal, bold, or even numeric values like 100 or 900 for finer control. The font style property lets us set the text to normal, italic, or oblique, while font variant is often used for things like small caps where lowercase letters are displayed as smaller uppercase letter. And finally, CSS provides a shorthand called the font property, which allows you to combine several of these into one line. For example, font italic 12 point Georgia serif would set the font style, size, and family all at once. So these font properties give us a lot of control to make our text both functional and stylish. Now, let's dive a little deeper into the font family property. This property lets us set which font the text should use, but instead of just writing one font, we usually provide a list of fonts. So that list can include family names, for example, which are fonts like specific fonts like Time New Roman, Arial, etc. If the font space has spaces like Times New Roman, we must wrap it in a quotation mark. If it doesn't have spaces like Arial, then quotes aren't really needed. So we can also use generic family names, which are a broader groups of font that include serif, sans serif, cursive, fantasy, and monospace. For example, Times New Roman and Georgia both belong to the serif family because they have those little strokes like serifs at the end of the letters. The browser will always try to use the first font in the list that is available on the user's computer. If it can't find it, it moves to the next one, and so on. That's why good practice is to start with the font you want and then add alternatives and finally end with the generic family, for example, font family, Arial, Helvetia, sans serif, etc. This way, your text will always display in a consistent style, even if a specific font isn't installed on the user's device. So here we can see the generic family names for fonts. These are broader categories that group similar looking fonts together. So first we have serif. The example fonts under the serif family is the Garamond, Georgia, Times New Roman. So see, these fonts have little H's at the end, so um, they are called embellishments like finish at the stroke, so they all fall under this family. And the plain stroke ends family are usually sans serif. They are like Arial, Helvetia, Verdana, etc. And similarly, we have other fonts like Cursive, Fantasy, Monospace, etc. So when you see or when you use a generic family name in your CSS, the browser picks a font from that family that's available on the user system. So this ensures text always look consistent, even if your chosen font or specifically chosen font isn't installed in the user's computer. So up until now, we have talked about fonts that are commonly available across most platforms, things like Arial, Courier New, Georgia, Times New Roman, Verdana, etc. These are what we call system fonts because they come pre-installed on almost every device. But what if we want to go beyond these limited choices? That's where web fonts come in. Web fonts are CSS features that allow us to load custom fonts directly from the web. When a user opens our web page, the font is downloaded into their browser and then applied to the text. So this means developers are no longer restricted to default fonts on a system. They can pick from thousands of styles, giving their website a unique and the kind of look they want. Moving on to font sizes, the font size property in CSS controls how large or small text appears. It can be set in different ways depending on whether you want flexible or fixed sizing. One option is predefined size names such as extra small, medium, etc. But for you can also use relative size names like smaller, larger, etc. But for more precision, CSS allows absolute size using specific units. The most commonly used unit is pixel in CSS, but we can also use the cm for centimeter, mm for millimeter, and inches, in for inches. Relative font size adjust based on another size, making text more flexible across devices and user settings. The M unit is relative to the element current font size. For example, 2M means twice the element's font size. So the REM unit is similar, but based on the root HTML elements font size. So 1.5 rem is 1.5 times the root size. So viewport units are also common. VW equals 1% of the browser's width and VH equals 1% of the browser's height. A percentage can also be used, such as 120% to make text 20% larger than its parent size. Since most browsers use a default of 16 pixels, but users may increase it for readability, it's good practice to use relative sizes. This ensures text scales property when the user changes their browser setting or devices. So here are some examples of font sizes in action. On the left side, you can see the CSS code, and on the right side, you see how it looks in the browser or when it is applied. Now let's talk about text properties in CSS. These properties let us control how text looks and behaves on a web page. The first one is text align. This controls the horizontal alignment of text inside an element. For example, we can align text to the left, right, center, or even use justify, which spreads the text evenly across the line. Next, we have text decoration. This property is useful for adding or removing a decoration. For instance, we can underline text, put a line through it, add an overline, or set it to none if we don't want any decoration. The text transform property help us change the case of letters. We can make everything uppercase or everything lowercase, or even capitalize just the first letter of each word. And finally, there is text indent. This one controls how much the first line of a paragraph is indented. Um, it's often used in articles, essays, or formal documents to give a clean and structured look. So, using text align, text can be aligned left, right, center, and justify. Each option changes how the content is positioned horizontally inside its container. So, moving on, when you add a link in HTML, the browser automatically underlines it. This is very useful because users can immediately recognize it as a clickable link. Now, in CSS, we can remove this underline by writing or defining the anchor text decoration set to none. This makes the line look cleaner, but the most important part is you have to be careful. If we remove the underline and only rely on color, some users, like those who are colorblind or have accessibility, may not even realize that it's a link. So underline isn't just decoration, it's a feature, and many people are used to it. So if you decide to remove it, make sure you are using another way to indicate that this is a clickable link or this thing has an action to do, so everyone still can recognize it. So that's all for chapter 4.5. We have one more chapter for this module. I will see you in that one.